The court documents trembled in my weathered hands as I sat across from Sienna, the woman who had once been my daughter-in-law, now dressed in a pearl-white pantsuit that probably cost more than 3 months of my grocery budget. At 48 years old, I had survived cancer, bankruptcy, and heartbreak, but nothing had prepared me for the cold audacity gleaming in her eyes as she prepared to accuse me of stealing the very children she had abandoned on my doorstep 15 years ago. Hello everyone, thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. Your support means everything to me. But now, let me tell you how I got here. The fluorescent lights of courtroom 7B hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across Sienna's perfectly contoured face. She didn't look at me, not once. Instead, she whispered urgently to her attorney, a slick-haired man named Gerald Pritchard who wore cufflinks that caught the light every time he gestured. I clutched my worn leather purse tighter, feeling the weight of 15 years of receipts, school records, and medical bills I'd carefully preserved. My attorney, a kind woman named Dottie Mansfield who worked at the county legal aid office, had warned me this would be ugly. But sitting there, watching Sienna's performance of maternal concern, I realized ugly didn't even begin to cover it. My son Garrett had been dead for 3 years, a heart attack at 39 that nobody saw coming. He'd been the only bridge between Sienna and any semblance of decency, and even that bridge had been crumbling for years before his death. Now she sat across the aisle, claiming she wanted her babies back, as if Marlo, Quinley, and Talwyn were dolls she'd left in storage and suddenly remembered she owned. The oldest, Marlo, was now 21 and sitting in college finals week, completely unaware that the woman who gave birth to her was trying to sue for a piece of the small inheritance I'd been saving for all 3 girls. Judge Wilton Carmichael entered, and we all rose. He was a gray-haired man in his 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense rulings, and I prayed he could see through Sienna's designer armor to the truth underneath. As we sat back down, my mind drifted back to that autumn day 15 years ago, the day that changed everything. The day Sienna's black sedan pulled up to my small ranch house outside Denton Falls, Montana, and she unloaded 3 little girls like unwanted luggage before speeding away into a life that apparently didn't have room for motherhood. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand why we were sitting in that courtroom, you need to know how this all began. If you're rooting for justice already, hit that like button and subscribe. This story is just getting started, and you won't believe what happens next. 15 years earlier, I was 43 and freshly divorced from my second husband, living in a 1,200-square-foot ranch house that had seen better decades. The September morning started like any other. I was on my 3rd cup of coffee, preparing to drive into town for my shift at Maple Creek Elementary where I worked as a cafeteria manager. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady, and after my divorce from Roland, steady was all I wanted. Then I heard the car. The black Lexus sedan looked out of place in my gravel driveway, too shiny and expensive against the faded blue siding of my house. I stepped onto the porch, coffee mug still in hand, as Sienna emerged from the driver's seat. Even then, she dressed like she was heading to a corporate boardroom rather than rural Montana. Her heels sank slightly into the gravel as she opened the back door and began unbuckling car seats. My heart lurched when I saw them, 6-year-old Marlo with her dark curls, 4-year-old Quinley clutching a stuffed rabbit, and 18-month-old Talwyn still half asleep and confused. Sienna? What's going on? I called out, setting my mug on the porch rail. My daughter-in-law didn't answer immediately. Instead, she hauled 2 duffel bags from the trunk and set them on the ground with a heavy thud. When she finally looked at me, her expression was completely blank, not sad, not guilty, just empty. That's what scared me most. A person who feels nothing is capable of anything. I need you to watch them for a while, she said, her voice flat and rehearsed, like she'd practiced the speech during the 3-hour drive from Helena. Garrett and I are going through some things, and I need space to figure out my life. The girls will be better off here. Better off here. As if my modest house and cafeteria salary were somehow superior to the 4-bedroom home in Helena that Garrett had bought with his construction business earnings. I looked at my son's children, all three of them staring at me with wide, uncertain eyes, and felt something crack open in my chest. "How long is a while?" I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. Sienna was already walking back to her car, her heels clicking against the gravel with sharp finality. She paused with her hand on the door handle, and for just a moment, I thought I saw something human flicker across her face, regret, maybe, or fear. But then it was gone, replaced by that same cold mask. "I'll call you," she said, and then she was gone. The Lexus kicked up dust as it disappeared down the county road, and I stood there holding Talwyn on my hip while Marlo and Quinley clung to my legs, wondering what the hell had just happened. Can you believe she just left them like that? Comment below what you would have done in my situation, and don't forget to subscribe to see how this unfolds. The days after Sienna's departure blurred into a chaotic rhythm of survival. I called Garrett immediately, of course, but he sounded just as blindsided as I felt. "She told me she was taking them to visit you for a few days," he said, his voice thick with confusion and what I suspected was alcohol. My son had never been good at handling crisis, he inherited that from his father. "She said she needed a break, that being a mother was suffocating her." I didn't think she meant. God, Ma, I didn't think she meant forever. But it certainly felt like forever. I used every vacation day and sick day I had saved up to stay home that first month, trying to settle 3 traumatized little girls into a house that barely had room for 1 adult. Marlo stopped talking almost entirely, communicating only through nods and head shakes. Quinley had nightmares every single night, waking up screaming for her mother who wasn't coming. And Talwyn, the baby, developed a habit of sitting by the front window for hours, watching the driveway as if willing that black Lexus to reappear. I tried calling Sienna dozens of times. Her phone went straight to voicemail until eventually the number was disconnected entirely. I reached out to her mother, Phyllis, who lived in Oregon, but the woman claimed she hadn't heard from her daughter in months and hung up before I could ask for help. Every door I knocked on slammed shut. It was like Sienna had evaporated into thin air, leaving only the wreckage of her children's hearts behind. By month 3, reality set in with brutal clarity. This wasn't temporary. I enrolled Marlo in 1st grade at Maple Creek Elementary, where I could keep an eye on her during my shifts. I found a home daycare run by a sweet woman named Bertina Hayes who agreed to watch Quinley and Talwyn at a reduced rate when she learned my situation. My boss, Principal Van Horn, graciously adjusted my schedule so I could drop off and pick up the girls. The community of Denton Falls rallied around us in that quiet, rural way. Casseroles appeared on my porch, hand-me-down clothes showed up in bags at my door, and the church held a collection that helped me buy bunk beds for the girls. But money was always tight. My salary barely covered basics even before I had 3 extra mouths to feed. I stopped buying coffee and started brewing the cheapest store brand. I learned to stretch hamburger meat with oatmeal and turned leftover vegetables into soup. I wore the same 4 outfits on rotation and cut my own hair in the bathroom mirror. At night, after the girls were finally asleep, I would sit at my kitchen table with a calculator and a stack of bills, trying to perform mathematical miracles with numbers that simply didn't add up. Garrett visited occasionally during that first year, but each visit was more painful than the last. He would sit on my couch holding Talwyn, tears streaming down his face as he promised to get his act together and make things right. But he was drowning in his own demons, the construction business was failing, he was drinking heavily, and I suspected there were other substances involved too. He couldn't save his daughters when he couldn't even save himself. On the 1-year anniversary of Sienna's disappearance, I sat the girls down and tried to explain in child-appropriate terms that their mother wasn't coming back anytime soon, and that they would be staying with me for the foreseeable future. Marlo, now 7, looked at me with eyes far too old for her age and said, "We already knew, Grandma Corinne. We're not stupid." That's when I realized these children had already survived something I was only beginning to understand, the death of the mother they thought they knew. This story gets even more intense. Smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens when Sienna finally reappears after 15 years. Years 2 through 5 were about establishing normalcy in a situation that was anything but normal. I formally petitioned for temporary guardianship of Marlo, Quinley, and Talwyn, which Garrett signed off on without contest. The court granted it easily. After all, Sienna had abandoned her children, and my son was in no condition to parent. The legal process was surprisingly simple, though the emotional toll was devastating. I watched Garrett spiral further into addiction, unable to stop his descent no matter how many times I begged him to get help. The girls slowly began to heal, though each in her own way. Marlo threw herself into academics, becoming the kind of student who color-coded her homework folders and never missed an assignment. I recognized the pattern. She was trying to control the one thing she could in a life that had been chaotic from the start. Quinley discovered art, spending hours drawing elaborate pictures of imaginary families where everyone smiled and held hands. Her therapist, a patient woman named Dr. Cardenas whom we saw through a sliding scale clinic, said this was Quinley's way of processing her abandonment. Talwyn, who had no real memory of Sienna, attached to me with fierce intensity. She was my shadow, following me from room to room, panicking if I left her sight even for a moment. Separation anxiety, Dr. Cardenas explained, was common in children who experienced early abandonment. We worked through it slowly, with patience and consistency, two things I had to excavate from deep within myself on days when I felt like I had nothing left to give. My own life shrank to accommodate theirs. I stopped dating entirely after a brief and disastrous attempt with a man named Hugh who couldn't understand why I chose to raise my grandchildren instead of letting the system handle it. I stopped going out with the few friends I had, because babysitters cost money I didn't have. My world became the four walls of our small house, the routine of school and work, and the precious moments when I would tuck 3 little girls into bed and feel like maybe, just maybe, we were going to be okay. Money remained a constant source of stress. I picked up weekend shifts cleaning houses for wealthier families in the county. I sold my modest jewelry collection, including my grandmother's wedding ring, to pay for Marlo's glasses when her school vision test revealed she couldn't see the board. I learned to shop clearance sales and thrift stores, to repair instead of replace, to make do with what we had. The girls never complained. They were too young to remember affluence, too resilient to dwell on what they didn't have. Garrett deteriorated rapidly during this period. His construction business collapsed under the weight of his addiction and poor decisions. He lost his house in Helena and bounced between friends' couches and cheap motels. His visits became sporadic and painful. He would show up disheveled and obviously high, making promises he couldn't keep and crying about failures he couldn't fix. The girls learned to expect nothing from their father, which broke my heart in ways I still can't fully articulate. Then, in year 5, Garrett died. A heart attack at 39, his body worn out from years of substance abuse and self-destruction. I got the call from the coroner's office at 6 in the morning, and I remember standing in my kitchen holding the phone, feeling like the ground had opened beneath my feet. My son, my complicated, troubled, beloved son, was gone. And now I had to tell his daughters that their father, the one parent who had at least tried to stay in orbit around them, had left them forever. The funeral was small. Garrett's friends from his better days came, plus some people from our church. I kept waiting for Sienna to appear. Surely she would come for her ex-husband's funeral, surely she retained some shred of decency, but she never showed. Not even a card or flowers. It was like she had never existed at all. The twists keep coming. Make sure you're subscribed because what happens in the few minutes will leave you speechless. After Garrett's death, something shifted in our household. The girls were 10, 8, and 6 now, old enough to understand permanence, old enough to grieve. We went through the motions of mourning together, attending grief counseling sessions at the community center where a kind facilitator named Jerome helped us process our loss. Marlo cried for the first time since Sienna had left, great heaving sobs that seemed to purge years of suppressed emotion. Quinley made a memory book filled with drawings of her father from happier times, images I suspected were more imagination than memory, but beautiful nonetheless. Talwyn, who barely remembered Garrett, grieved the idea of a father more than the man himself. But grief, I learned, can be a catalyst for growth. With Garrett gone, I stopped waiting for someone else to fix our situation. I stopped hoping for rescue or reconciliation. I accepted that these 3 girls were mine now, completely and irrevocably, and I had better figure out how to do right by them. So I made changes. Big ones. I enrolled in night classes at the community college, working towards certification as an educational administrator. It took me 4 years of brutal schedules, working full-time, parenting full-time, studying whenever I could steal an hour, but I eventually earned my credential and applied for an assistant principal position at Maple Creek Elementary. To my shock, I got it. The salary increase was modest but meaningful, enough to stop the constant financial hemorrhaging that had defined our lives. The girls blossomed in ways I hadn't dared hope for. Marlo earned straight A's and a reputation as the most conscientious student her teachers had ever encountered. She joined the debate team in middle school and discovered she had a gift for argument, a skill that would prove useful in ways none of us could have predicted. Quinley's artistic talent caught the attention of a local gallery owner who displayed her work in a youth exhibition, giving my middle child the validation and recognition she desperately needed. Talwyn, my baby, became the social butterfly, making friends effortlessly and bringing constant laughter into our home. We developed rituals and traditions that were ours alone. Friday nights were movie nights with homemade popcorn and blanket forts in the living room. Saturdays we worked in the garden together, growing vegetables that reduced our grocery bill and gave us a sense of accomplishment. Sundays we cooked big breakfasts and talked about the week ahead, each girl sharing her worries and hopes while I listened and offered what wisdom I could muster. But underneath the normalcy, questions lingered. The girls asked about Sienna occasionally, especially as they got older and understood more about the magnitude of her abandonment. Why didn't she want us? Quinley asked once, her voice small and broken. I had no good answer. How do you explain to a child that some people aren't capable of the love they deserve? How do you make sense of something that has no sense to it? I told them the truth as gently as I could. Their mother made a choice I didn't understand, a choice that hurt everyone, but it didn't reflect their worth or value. They were wanted, desperately, completely wanted, by me. I hoped that was enough. Most days, I think it was. By the time Marlo reached high school, our lives had achieved a stability I once thought impossible. We weren't wealthy, but we were secure. We had a home filled with love, laughter, and the kind of hard-won peace that comes from surviving together. I allowed myself to believe that maybe the hardest parts were behind us. I should have known better. Peace, I've learned, is always temporary when people like Sienna exist in the world. Just when you think you know where this is going, everything changes. Stay tuned and don't forget to share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Marlo was 3 months into her freshman year at Montana State University when the first letter arrived. She had earned a partial academic scholarship, and I had taken out loans to cover the rest, loans I'd be paying off until I was 70, but worth every penny to see my granddaughter pursue her dreams of becoming a civil rights attorney. Quinley was thriving in high school, her artwork earning regional recognition. Talwyn was in middle school, navigating adolescence with the same social grace that had always defined her. The letter came on a Tuesday in October, addressed to me in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a single piece of expensive stationery with a short, devastating message: "It's time we discuss the girl's future. I'll be in touch. Sienna." No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of 15 years of absence. Just a vague threat wrapped in civility. I stood in my kitchen holding that letter, feeling 15 years of carefully constructed stability crack beneath my feet. My hands shook so badly I had to set the paper down on the counter. Sienna was back. After all this time, after all the silence, after letting me raise her children through scraped knees and broken hearts and endless sleepless nights, now she wanted to discuss their future? I called Dottie Mansfield immediately. She had helped me with the original guardianship paperwork and had become something of a friend over the years. "Don't respond," she advised, her voice calm but serious. "Don't engage at all. If she wants something, she'll have to take formal legal action, and then we'll deal with it properly." But waiting for Sienna to make her move felt like watching a storm gather on the horizon, knowing destruction was coming but powerless to stop it. The second letter arrived 3 weeks later, this time from an attorney's office in Helena. Gerald Pritchard, Esquire, was representing Miss Sienna Westbrook. She'd gone back to her maiden name in a matter concerning custody arrangements and financial restitution for parental alienation. My blood turned to ice as I read the legal jargon. Sienna wasn't just coming back, she was coming back with accusations, claiming I had somehow prevented her from being part of her children's lives. I immediately called a family meeting with Quinley and Talwyn. Marlo came home from college that weekend, and I sat all three of them down and told them the truth. Their mother had resurfaced and was threatening legal action. I watched their reactions carefully. Marlo's jaw tightened with barely suppressed rage. Quinley burst into tears. Talwyn, my 15-year-old who barely remembered Sienna, just looked confused. "Why now?" Marlo asked, her voice sharp with the debater's precision she'd honed over years of competition. "What does she possibly want after all this time?" That was the question none of us could answer. What could possibly motivate a woman to abandon her children and then, 15 years later, decide to upend their lives? The answer came in the third letter, and it made a sick kind of sense. My mother, the girl's great-grandmother, had passed away 6 months earlier and left a modest inheritance to be divided among her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It wasn't a fortune, maybe $40,000 for each of the girls, but it was something. Money I had carefully placed in trust funds for their futures, for college and emergencies and starting their adult lives. Money that Sienna apparently knew about and wanted a piece of. "She wants their inheritance," I said aloud, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "She left them with nothing, disappeared without a trace, and now that there's money involved, suddenly she's interested in being their mother again." The ugliness of it, the pure mercenary calculation, made me feel physically ill. Marlo stood up from the couch, her hands clenched into fists. "Over my dead body," she said quietly, and I heard in her voice the steel that would one day make her a formidable attorney. "She doesn't get to do this. She doesn't get to come back now and pretend she cares." But caring, I was learning, had nothing to do with it. Sienna didn't need to care, she just needed a lawyer and a willingness to lie. And from the letters that kept arriving with increasing aggression, she had both in abundance. This is about to get intense. Hit that like button if you're Team Grandma, and keep watching to see how this courtroom battle unfolds. The official lawsuit arrived the week before Thanksgiving, delivered by a process server who looked apologetic as he handed me the thick stack of legal documents. Sienna was suing for joint custody of Quinley and Talwyn, Marlo was legally an adult and therefore outside her reach, and she was seeking compensation for emotional distress and financial losses incurred due to parental alienation. The amount she was asking for made my vision blur, $200,000, plus legal fees. I sat at my kitchen table reading the complaint, each accusation more absurd than the last. According to Sienna's narrative, I had interfered with her relationship with her children, poisoned them against her, and exploited her temporary mental health crisis to permanently separate her from her family. The lawsuit painted me as a manipulative villain who had stolen her children out of spite, while she was cast as a victimized mother fighting her way back to her babies. The lies were so audacious, so completely divorced from reality, that I almost laughed. Except there was nothing funny about the legal fees I couldn't afford, or the way this lawsuit was tearing open wounds we had spent 15 years trying to heal. Quinley was having panic attacks. Talwyn stopped eating. And Marlo, my fierce eldest, was making plans to drop out of college to help me fight. Dottie Mansfield sat across from me in her modest office, reviewing the complaint with a furrowed brow. "This is ambitious," she said carefully, which I understood to mean legally questionable. "She abandoned her children for 15 years. She has no evidence of you interfering with contact because she didn't attempt contact. This should be easy to dismiss. But the word should carry weight. Family court," Dottie explained, "could be unpredictable. Judges sometimes gave biological parents second chances, especially if they showed up looking polished and remorseful. And Sienna was nothing if not polished. When I finally saw her at the first pretrial hearing, I barely recognized her. She had aged well, her 43 years hidden behind expensive skincare and perfectly highlighted hair. She wore subtle makeup and a conservative navy dress that screamed responsible mother. When the judge asked her to explain her 15-year absence, she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue and spoke about postpartum depression, about feeling overwhelmed and ashamed, about making a terrible mistake in a moment of mental health crisis. "I thought they would be better off without me," she said, her voice breaking perfectly on cue. "I was so sick, Your Honor. I couldn't see straight. I thought I was doing the right thing by leaving them with my former mother-in-law who seemed so capable. I was going to get help and come back, but by the time I was healthy enough, I was terrified they would hate me. So I waited. And waited. And now I know I can't wait anymore, I need to make this right." I sat there listening to her rewrite history, feeling rage build in my chest like lava. This woman who had never sent a birthday card, never made a phone call, never contributed a single dollar to their care, was now performing maternal devotion for a judge who was nodding sympathetically. The injustice of it was suffocating. When it was my turn to speak, I kept my voice steady and factual. I presented documentation, 15 years of school records showing me as the emergency contact, medical records with my name as guardian, receipts for everything from school supplies to braces to prom dresses. I brought letters from teachers, neighbors, and counselors all testifying to the stability and love I had provided. I laid out the evidence of Sienna's complete abandonment in stark, undeniable terms. But evidence, I was learning, was only part of the story. The other part was narrative, and Sienna's attorney was a master storyteller. He painted a picture of a young mother destroyed by mental illness, failed by a healthcare system that didn't catch her suffering, and then systematically excluded from her children's lives by a bitter ex-mother-in-law who wanted to play do-over with motherhood. It was fiction, but it was compelling fiction. Judge Carmichael listened to both sides and then ordered a guardian ad litem to investigate, a neutral attorney who would interview the girls and make recommendations about what was in their best interest. The hearing date was set for 3 months away. 3 months of uncertainty, 3 months of watching my granddaughters suffer, 3 months of Sienna's presence poisoning the peace we had built. As we left the courthouse that day, Sienna approached me for the first time in 15 years. Up close, I could see the calculation in her eyes, the same empty coldness I remembered from that September morning when she dumped her children on my porch. "You can't win this, Corinne," she said quietly, her voice stripped of the emotion she'd performed for the judge. "Those girls are mine by blood. And that inheritance money? I deserve a piece of it for all the years I struggled alone." I looked at her for a long moment, this stranger who shared DNA with the 3 people I loved most in the world. "You're going to lose," I said softly. "Not because of what I do, but because they remember. Quinley remembers waiting by the window for you. Talwyn remembers the nightmares. And Marlowe remembers everything." For just a second, something flickered across Sienna's face, fear, maybe, or the dawning realization that she had underestimated the damage she'd done. But then the mask slipped back into place, and she walked away toward the parking lot where her expensive car waited. The battle, I realized, was just beginning. You won't believe what the Guardian ad litem discovers. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you don't miss. The guardian ad litem assigned to our case was a woman named Fiona Blackwell, a no-nonsense attorney in her 50s with a reputation for being thorough and unswayed by theatrics. She spent weeks conducting her investigation, interviewing everyone involved in the girls' lives. She talked to teachers, coaches, therapists, neighbors, anyone who could speak to the reality of how Marlo, Quinley, and Talwyn had been raised. But the hardest part was watching my granddaughters sit through interviews with Fiona, knowing they were being forced to relive trauma they had worked so hard to heal from. Quinley came home from her session red-eyed and exhausted, collapsing into my arms. She asked me if I wanted to see Sienna, Quinley whispered. She asked if I felt like I was missing out on having a mother. I didn't know what to say, Grandma. Am I supposed to want her? My heart broke for her, for all of them. They had been put in an impossible position, asked to choose between loyalty to me and some theoretical relationship with a biological parent who was essentially a stranger. I held Quinley and told her the truth, she didn't owe Sienna anything. Whatever she felt, or didn't feel, was valid and okay. Talwyn's interview was shorter. At 15, she was the most detached from Sienna, with only vague early memories that had faded into nothing. She's nobody to me, Talwyn told Fiona bluntly. Grandma Corinne is my parent. That's it. I don't care what biology says. I worried about Talwyn's anger, about how much rage she was carrying for a woman she barely knew, but her therapist assured me it was a normal response to the intrusion Sienna represented. Marlo refused to participate at first, claiming she was an adult and therefore her opinion didn't matter to the court. But Fiona convinced her that her testimony about what she remembered from 15 years ago could be crucial. So Marlo sat down and gave Fiona a detailed, devastating account of her childhood, the sudden abandonment, the years of silence, the way she had to grow up too fast to help me care for her younger sisters. Sienna isn't a mother, Marlo told Fiona coldly. She's a biological donor. Grandma Corinne is the one who sat through my panic attacks when I couldn't breathe. She's the one who stayed up all night when Quinley had night terrors. She's the one who sacrificed everything so we could have a childhood worth remembering. Sienna doesn't get to swoop in now and claim credit for any of that. Meanwhile, Sienna was putting on a full-court press of her own. She rented an apartment in Denton Falls and started showing up at places where she knew the girls might be, Quinley's art shows, Talwyn's soccer games. She never approached them directly, her attorney had probably advised against it, but her presence was a constant, uncomfortable reminder of the chaos she was causing. She posted photos on social media with captions about fighting for my babies and never giving up on family, cultivating a sympathetic online audience who knew nothing about the real story. The manipulation was masterful and infuriating. Sienna understood that public opinion could influence legal outcomes, so she carefully crafted a narrative of redemption, the struggling mother overcoming mental illness to reunite with her children. She gave interviews to local news stations, crying on camera about her mistakes and her journey to healing. She framed me as the obstacle standing between her and maternal redemption. But Fiona Blackwell wasn't swayed by performances. During one of her check-ins with me, she asked pointed questions about Sienna's claims of interference. Did you ever prevent her from calling or visiting? Fiona asked. I showed her my phone records, dozens of unanswered calls to Sienna's old number in those first months, emails that bounced back as undeliverable. I showed her the Facebook messages I'd sent to Sienna's profile before she blocked me, begging her to at least send birthday cards for the girls. She ghosted us, I said simply. I tried to maintain contact for their sake, but she made it impossible. And eventually, I had to accept that she didn't want to be found. Fiona nodded, taking notes. I couldn't read her expression, but I hoped she was seeing through Sienna's carefully constructed lies. The weeks stretched into months. The legal fees were mounting, even with Dottie's discounted rates. I was drowning in costs I couldn't afford. I took out a second mortgage on my house, the house I had almost paid off, just to keep fighting. Marlo insisted on using part of her inheritance from her great-grandmother to help, despite my protests. This is exactly what great-grandma would have wanted, she said firmly. Protecting our family. Finally, after 3 months of investigation, Fiona Blackwell submitted her report to the court. I wasn't allowed to read it before the hearing, but Dottie called me the night before we were due back in court. "Corinne," she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice, "you need to trust the process tomorrow. I think we're going to be okay." For the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to hope. The courtroom showdown is next. You do not want to miss this. Subscribe now and keep watching. The courtroom was packed when we arrived for the final hearing. Somehow word had gotten out about the case, and local residents who knew our story filled the gallery seats. I saw teachers from Maple Creek Elementary, parents of the girls' friends, members of our church congregation, all of them there to support us. The show of community solidarity made me emotional in a way I hadn't expected. Sienna sat at her table looking serene and confident, her attorney Gerald Pritchard reviewing notes with the casual air of someone who expected an easy victory. I tried to read their body language for clues but found nothing. Dottie Mansfield squeezed my hand reassuringly as Judge Carmichael took the bench. "I've reviewed the Guardian ad litem's report extensively," Judge Carmichael began, his voice grave and measured. "I've also reviewed all submitted evidence, interviewed witnesses, and considered the arguments presented by both parties. This is a complex case involving difficult questions about parental rights, abandonment, and what constitutes the best interest of minor children." My heart hammered so hard I could barely hear over the pounding in my ears. Quinley sat beside me, gripping my other hand. Talwyn was on her other side, and Marlo sat behind us in the gallery, her presence a solid wall of support. Judge Carmichael turned to Sienna first. "Ms. Westbrook, I want to acknowledge that mental health struggles are real and serious. If you were indeed suffering from postpartum depression or related conditions 15 years ago, I sympathize with that struggle. However, sympathy does not override the factual record before this court." He paused, letting his words settle over the courtroom. Sienna's confident expression faltered slightly. "The evidence shows that you did not seek treatment for mental illness during the period in question. You did not attempt contact with your children, not through Mrs. Reeves, not through your ex-husband before his death, not through any third party. You disconnected your phone number, ignored multiple attempts at communication, and effectively vanished from your daughter's lives. This court finds no credible evidence of interference or parental alienation on the part of Mrs. Reeves. In fact, the evidence demonstrates the opposite. She attempted to facilitate contact, which you refused." I felt Quinley's grip on my hand tighten. I squeezed back, hardly daring to breathe. Furthermore, Judge Carmichael continued, his voice hardening, "The timing of this lawsuit, coming mere months after the children received a modest inheritance from their great-grandmother, raises serious questions about your motivations. The Guardian ad litem's report is quite clear. Marlo, Quinley, and Talwyn have expressed unequivocally that they do not wish to have a relationship with you. They view Mrs. Reeves as their parent in every meaningful sense, and forcing contact would cause them significant emotional harm." Sienna's attorney stood abruptly. "Your Honor, biological parents have rights." "Sit down, Mr. Pritchard," Judge Carmichael said sharply. "Rights come with responsibilities. Ms. Westbrook abandoned those responsibilities 15 years ago. She cannot resurrect them now because it's financially convenient." The judge turned his attention to me, and his expression softened. "Mrs. Reeves, this court recognizes the extraordinary sacrifice you've made. You took in 3 children when you were barely financially stable yourself. You worked multiple jobs, went back to school, and gave those children a stable, loving home when their biological parents could not or would not. The evidence of your devotion is overwhelming." Tears were streaming down my face now, and I didn't care who saw them. Therefore, this court rules as follows: Ms. Westbrook's petition for custody is denied in its entirety. Mrs. Reeves will retain sole legal guardianship of Quinley Reeves and Talwyn Reeves until they reach majority. Furthermore, Ms. Westbrook's claim for financial compensation is dismissed with prejudice, meaning it cannot be refiled. The inheritance funds held in trust for the three girls will remain untouched and under Mrs. Reeves' stewardship as originally intended. The courtroom erupted in applause. Judge Carmichael banged his gavel. "Order! I'm not finished." The room fell silent again. "Ms. Westbrook, I want to be very clear. You are not to contact these children directly or indirectly. You are not to attend their school functions, extracurricular activities, or appear at their home. If Marlo, Quinley, or Talwyn wish to initiate contact with you in the future, that is their choice as they mature. But you have no right to force yourself into their lives. Do you understand?" Sienna's face had gone pale, all pretense of maternal concern stripped away. She nodded stiffly, and I saw in her eyes the same cold emptiness I remembered from 15 years ago. She had gambled and lost, and now she was furious. "This court is adjourned," Judge Carmichael declared, and banged his gavel one final time. The gallery erupted again, people rushing forward to hug us and offer congratulations. Quinley was sobbing with relief, and Talwyn was laughing and crying simultaneously. Marlo pushed through the crowd and threw her arms around all of us, and we stood there in the middle of the courtroom, four women who had survived together, holding each other while the world celebrated around us. I looked over Marlo's shoulder and saw Sienna gathering her papers with sharp, angry movements. Gerald Pritchard was speaking to her urgently, probably advising her on next steps or appeals. But I knew she wouldn't appeal. She had gotten what she came for, or tried to, anyway, and when that failed, she had no more use for the children she'd never actually wanted. As she walked toward the courtroom exit, Sienna paused and looked directly at me. For a moment, I thought she might say something, apologize, curse me, acknowledge the damage she'd caused. But she just stared, her expression unreadable, before turning and walking out of our lives for what I hoped was the last time. Dottie Mansfield appeared at my elbow, beaming. "You did it, Corinne. You protected your family." I hugged her tightly, this woman who had fought for us when we couldn't afford fancy lawyers, who had believed in us when the odds seemed impossible. "We did it," I corrected her. "All of us together." That night, we went to the local diner that had been our family tradition for years, the place where we celebrated good report cards and birthdays and small victories. We ordered too much food and laughed too loud and didn't care who stared. Marlo made a toast with her water glass, to Grandma Corinne, who taught us that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up. We clinked our glasses together, and in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, peace. Real, solid peace. We're almost at the end of this incredible journey. Stay tuned for the final chapter where I reveal what happened next and the lesson I learned from all of this. 2 years have passed since that courtroom victory, and life has settled into a new rhythm, one defined by healing rather than survival. Marlo graduated from Montana State with honors and got accepted into law school at Georgetown University. Watching her walk across that graduation stage, I thought about the scared 6-year-old who stopped talking after her mother abandoned her, and I marveled at the strong, brilliant woman she'd become. Quinley received a full scholarship to the Rhode Island School of Design, her artistic talent finally getting the recognition it deserved. Her work has been featured in several exhibitions, and she's developing a series exploring themes of abandonment and found family. It's painful subject matter, but she approaches it with courage and honesty that takes my breath away. She calls me every Sunday without fail, and we talk for hours about everything and nothing. Talwyn is now 17 and in her senior year of high school. She's been accepted to 4 universities already and is deciding between programs in social work and psychology, fields she says she's drawn to because she wants to help kids who've been through what she experienced. My baby, who used to sit by the window waiting for a mother who never came, is now determined to be the person who shows up for others. As for me, I retired from my position as assistant principal last year. The decades of work, the the stress of the lawsuit, and the simple accumulation of years had taken their toll. But retirement isn't quiet. I volunteer at a local organization that supports grandparents raising grandchildren, sharing my story and offering practical advice to others navigating the complex systems I once struggled through alone. We never heard from Sienna again after the court ruling. I check occasionally out of habit, curious if she's tried to contact the girls through social media or other channels, but there's been nothing. It's as if she truly vanished this time, accepting that her gamble for their inheritance money had failed spectacularly. I try not to feel bitter about it. Bitterness is a poison that hurts the person carrying it more than anyone else, but I won't pretend I've forgiven her either. Some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive. The girls have mixed feelings about their biological mother, which their therapists assure me is completely normal and healthy. Marlo remains angry and has no interest in ever speaking to Sienna. Quinley is more curious, sometimes wondering what her mother's life is like now, but not curious enough to reach out. Talwyn is largely indifferent, which I think is actually the healthiest response. Sienna simply doesn't factor into her concept of family. What Sienna tried to destroy, our family unit, our financial security, our peace, she ultimately made stronger. The lawsuit forced us to confront our trauma directly, to articulate what we meant to each other, to fight for the bonds we built. It was horrible while it was happening, but in retrospect, I think we all emerged more certain of who we are and what matters. The inheritance money that Sienna tried to claim remains in trust for the girls, supplemented by what I've managed to save over the years. It's not a fortune, but it's enough to give them each a solid start in their adult lives, enough for Marlo's law school, for Quinley's art supplies and studio space, for Talwyn's undergraduate education. That money represents something more than dollars to me. It represents the future Sienna tried to steal and the future we protected together. I still live in the same small ranch house in Denton Falls, though it's quieter now with the girls scattered across the country pursuing their dreams. But they come home for holidays and summer visits, and the house fills with laughter and chaos again, reminding me why I fought so hard to keep us together. People sometimes ask me if I regret taking in my granddaughters 15 years ago, if I wish I'd let the system handle it, if I resent the sacrifices I made. The question always baffles me. Regret? For getting to raise 3 incredible human beings? For being present for their first days of school, their heartbreaks, their triumphs? For getting to be called grandma with the kind of fierce love usually reserved for mothers? There's not a single second I regret. Not the financial struggles, not the sleepless nights, not even the brutal legal battle that threatened everything we built. All of it, every difficult, exhausting, beautiful moment, was worth it. If I could go back to that September morning 15 years ago, knowing everything that was coming, I would still step onto that porch and take those 3 little girls into my arms. I would still choose them every single time. Because that's what love is. Not biology or obligation or legal definitions. Love is showing up. Love is staying when things get hard. Love is fighting for the people who matter, even when you're exhausted and broke and scared. Sienna thought she could waltz back into our lives after 15 years and claim what she'd abandoned. She thought blood would trump devotion, that a genetic connection would outweigh a decade and a half of actual parenting. She was wrong on every count. The girls are mine, not because a judge said so, not because their father is gone, not because their mother abandoned them. They're mine because we chose each other, day after day, year after year, through every challenge and celebration. We built this family from the ashes of abandonment, and no lawsuit could ever tear down what we created together. So here I am at 64, living in my little house in Montana, surrounded by photos of 3 extraordinary young women who call me grandma and mean it with their whole hearts. The legal battles are over. The financial struggles have eased. The trauma has been processed and integrated into our stories. We survived. More than that, we thrived. And if Sienna is out there somewhere watching this, I want her to know, you lost. Not in court, that was just paperwork. You lost the moment you drove away 15 years ago, because you gave up 3 remarkable human beings who would have loved you fiercely if you just stayed. You gave up the privilege of watching them grow, of being part of their lives, of mattering to them. That was your choice. And it's one you'll have to live with forever. As for me and my girls, we're going to keep living, keep loving, and keep showing up for each other, because that's what real families do. Thank you so much for staying with me through this entire journey. If this story touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Your support means the world to me. And most importantly, drop a comment below telling me, what's your definition of family? Is it blood, or is it the people who show up when it matters? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, remember, family is what you make it, and love is measured in presence, not promises. God bless you all.